The diner was quiet that night, the hum of the fluorescent lights and the clink of coffee cups my only company. Most nights, it was truckers passing through, grabbing a quick meal before hitting the road. I first noticed the delivery truck around 2 a.m., parked at the far edge of the lot. The driver stood outside, pacing, his breath visible in the cold air. The way he kept glancing at the diner made my stomach tighten. After a while, he came in. He was tall, disheveled, and kept his head down. He didn't meet my eyes as he slid into a booth. "Coffee?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded without a word. I poured the coffee and left the pot on his table. When I came back, he hadn't touched it. He just sat there, fidgeting, staring out the window. Then, without warning, he got up and left. No food, no drink, nothing. I didn't notice the blood until I started wiping down the counter where he'd leaned. A smeared red handprint stained the edge. My chest tightened. I looked out the window. His truck was still there, engine idling, but he was nowhere in sight. Curiosity got the better of me. I stepped outside, the cold biting at my skin. The truck was enormous, the kind used for long hauls. As I approached, I noticed the back doors were slightly open. A dim interior light spilled out. That's when I saw it. A hand, bound at the wrist, pale fingers curled slightly, barely visible in the gap between the doors. My breath caught in my throat. I stumbled back, heart racing. What do? I ran back inside, locking the door behind me. My hands shook as I picked up the phone to dial 911. "Emergency services," the operator said. "There's a man. His truck. There's blood," I stammered. The operator's voice was calm, but my mind was racing. She said to stay inside and keep the doors locked. Officers were on their way. I peeked out the window again. The driver was back. He stood by the truck, looking toward the diner. His face was shadowed, but I could feel his eyes on me. He took a step forward, then another. I backed away, clutching the phone like a lifeline. The man tried the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. His hand slammed against the glass, leaving another smear of blood. "Police are on their way," I shouted, but for a moment he froze. Then, without a word, he turned, got into his truck, and drove off. When the police arrived, I told them everything. They found the truck abandoned a few miles down the road. The back was empty, no signs of the bound hand or the driver. I never worked another overnight shift. Even now, I still wonder who or what was in that truck. It was just another slow night. The convenience store sat on the edge of a quiet suburban street, the kind of place where not much happened after dark. I was the only one working, as usual, when he walked in. At first, I didn't think anything of it. The man was in his late 30s, scruffy, wearing a hoodie and jeans. He didn't come up to the counter to buy anything. Instead, he just wandered around, glancing at the shelves like he was looking for something. I'd seen people like him before, just passing time, maybe waiting for someone, but there was something off about him. He didn't pick anything up. He didn't even pretend to look at the snacks or the drinks. He just kept glancing over at me every few seconds, his eyes following me as I wiped down the counter. "Can I help you find something?" I asked after a while. He didn't answer right away. He just stared at me for a second, then shook his head. "No, I'm just browsing." His voice was low, almost too casual. I went back to my tasks, but the unease started creeping in. Every time I looked up, he was a little closer, first by the chips, then by the drinks, and then right behind me by the counter. "Are you from around here?" he asked suddenly. I glanced over, unsure how to answer. "Yeah, just moved here a few months ago." He nodded like he was making mental notes. "What's it like? The town, I mean." "It's fine. Quiet. Nothing much happens." I was starting to feel uncomfortable. He didn't respond right away. He just kept staring at me like he was sizing me up. I took a few steps back, trying to keep my distance. It had been an hour now, and I was starting to get nervous. He hadn't bought a thing, just kept moving around the store, getting closer and closer. Then, like he had been waiting for something, he glanced out the door and smiled. A car pulled into the parking lot. A woman walked into the store. The man didn't wait. He turned and left in a hurry, glancing at the door one last time before disappearing outside. I thought that was it. Maybe he was just strange, harmless. But then I saw him again. I locked the door behind the woman who had entered, then turned around to check the security cameras. My stomach dropped when I saw him. He was standing outside in the shadows, watching. I moved toward the back of the store, the hairs on my neck standing up, and my pulse was racing. Then came the sound of the door handle rattling. I held my breath. I heard him banging on the glass, low and steady. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking. I called 911, but there was no way to explain what was happening without sounding insane. I watched as he paced in front of the door, then heard the rattle again. This time, he was trying to force it open. I stayed quiet, hiding behind the counter, praying the door would hold. Eventually, the banging stopped. I didn't see him leave. The police came an hour later. They checked the cameras in the area outside, no sign of him, but I knew he'd been there. I'd seen him watching, heard him trying to break in. I never saw the man again, but every night after, I made sure to lock the door as soon as the last customer left. The shift started like any other. The warehouse was empty, silent, except for the hum of the overhead lights. I made my rounds, checked the cameras, and got comfortable. My colleague, Greg, was supposed to be working the other side of the building. We'd cross paths now and then, but it was usually quiet. Around 2:00 a.m., I realized something was off. Greg wasn't answering his radio. At first, I thought he might be taking a break or dealing with something, but when I passed by his usual post, I saw his flashlight on the floor near the exit. I picked it up. "Greg?" I called out, but only the hum of the lights answered. I called his phone. No answer. I checked the security cameras. Everything looked normal. The warehouse was vast, filled with boxes and machinery, but there was no sign of Greg. I decided to search the building. I moved slowly through the aisles, my footsteps echoing. As I passed the storage bays, I thought I heard something. Soft breathing, like someone trying to stay quiet. "Greg?" I whispered, feeling my throat tighten. No response. I kept walking, checking the back corners. I passed an open window that hadn't been open earlier. The cold air stung my face. Someone had been in here. The unease settled in my stomach, but I pushed it down. There had to be an explanation. I continued my search, but the more I walked, the stranger it felt. The heavy breathing was louder now, too soft to be Greg, but too close to ignore. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, careful, almost like they were trying to match mine. I turned a corner, and nothing. I found a door that had been propped open, a tool wedged underneath. It wasn't open during my first round. Something wasn't right. I checked the outside cameras, but the footage was glitching, like someone had tampered with the system. Panic crept into my chest. I was alone, but something wasn't. As I turned back toward the center of the warehouse, I saw it. A trail of scuff marks leading from the back hallway toward the main floor. They weren't there earlier. I followed it, my breath shallow. The marks ended near a stack of boxes. I reached for my radio, but it was dead. Suddenly, the breathing was right behind me, and I spun around. Nothing! I stumbled back, my foot hitting something, Greg's keys lying in the middle of the aisle. I ran. My heart pounded as I bolted for the exit. The sounds followed me, footsteps, breathing, shifting behind the shelves. I didn't look back. I threw open the warehouse doors and ran outside. When the police arrived, they searched the entire building. They found nothing. No sign of Greg, no intruder. But I knew something had been in there with me. I never went back to that job.